It was named for the city in which it stands, a house built to greet the masses with open arms. It has welcomed the great and the powerful and courted the brilliant and the bold. It has brought us the champions of sport and the leaders of the world. Spanning the years, it has become home to us all, and inside its walls, we've seen history unfold. And so we remember the passion, we remember the joy, and when the crowds go silent, we will remember the roar. Chicago Stadium, built in a time and place reflective of its character, rough and rugged, grand and glamorous. It has stood proudly in Chicago's West Side for nearly 65 years, serving the city as a mecca for sports and entertainment.
The noise factor, everything about that makes Chicago Stadium the greatest building only in not North America, but in the world to watch an event out of. It is the best, and it's the #1 gross in the National Hockey League today. So that's quite a tribute to those people who had the idea of building a building back in 1929 that can compete with the best of them today.
Chicago of the 1920s was a city renowned for its competitive politics and organized crime. Gangster Al Capone ruled Chicago's underworld, cornering the market on every vice imaginable.
So crime was very, very prominent, very, very powerful. Capone and his cahoots had major influence in the Republican Party, which was very viable in Chicago in those days. Chicago was a two-party city.
The Jazz Age was in full swing in America. It was amid this social and political climate where Chicago Stadium found its origins.
Other cities at this time had prominent indoor arenas for sports. The 1920s was the golden age of sports. We had the amphitheater, we had the Chicago Coliseum, which was small and dated and not very popular with the public.
A Chicagoan by the name of Patty Harmon, who made his money in dance halls and amusement parks, set out to construct a sports arena big enough and grand enough to rival the sports temples being built in other U.S. cities.
It was in 1929 when Patty opened the Chicago Stadium, and it's interesting that in his prospectus to the investors that he said the six-day bike race would be one of the biggest generators of money for the Chicago Stadium.
Construction began in 1926 with promises for completion within 9 months. 3 years later, America's largest indoor arena was unveiled to the city. Its first event was a boxing match pairing Tommy Loughran and Mickey Walker. An opening night crowd of 18,000 witnessed Loughran defend his light heavyweight title in a 15-round decision.
Unfortunately for Harmon, his plans for the stadium did not work as well as anticipated.
After disappointing gate receipts in the advent of the Great Depression, Harmon was forced out of control by other investors within a year.
But within 6 months, Harmon's tenure with the building he had built was gone. He was essentially kicked out of the business he had started. Not long thereafter, in 1931, he died in a car crash. And according to the Tribune of the day, he said all he had left was the $2.50 in his pocket.
As the stadium was being built in the late 1920s, so too was a newly founded hockey team, which played its game at the Chicago Coliseum. The city of Chicago received an NHL franchise in 1926, when Major Frederick McLaughlin paid $12,000 for the team he would name the Blackhawks. In 1934, just 8 years after their inception, the Blackhawks won their first Stanley Cup. In the deciding game, right-winger Mush March broke a scoreless deadlock with a goal 60 minutes into overtime against the Detroit Red Wings. The Stanley Cup champion Hawks had arrived.
When I was a kid, I was in here with the 1934 Stanley Cup Series, which was total excitement. And I just can't help but look back now and think of some of the people that played in that series. People like Mush Marsh. The crowd was fantastic.
It didn't take the Blackhawks long to make a return visit to Stanley Cup glory. Just 4 years later, in 1938, the Hawks defeated the Toronto Maple Leafs 3-1 to win their second cup in the team's young history.
And there's been so many exciting events. And the history of the Chicago Stadium is second to none.
The Blackhawks were but one of the draws in the stadium's early years.
People remember the six-day bike race. People used to come around and sit all night while these six-day bike races went around and around and around in teams of 2.
Six-day bicycle racing was a cornerstone event and proved to be a major attraction throughout the 1930s.
It was a very exciting time because the races ran for 6 continuous days, morning and night, and the infield was all filled with people all the time, and there were singers and people that were promoting their newest songs, and there were acts, small acts and so forth to entertain the people.
Chicago's Carl Stockholm, a World War I veteran, led a distinguished field of cyclists from around the globe.
It was a man stripped down to racing equipment, understand? A sort of atmosphere of danger that kept people on edge. It packed them in.
The six-day bike races inspired the installation of the stadium's prized possession, the Barton Pipe Organ. The organ was built to provide music accompaniment to events such as the bike races.
At that time, the organist, Mr. Al Melgard, who was the first organist here for 40 years until he died, accompanied every function that went on in this building.
Its 4,000 pipes are actually fixtures within the stadium structure and equal the decibel level of 25 brass bands.
Pipe organs literally move air in the building. And because some of the bass pipes are so big and so heavy and the vibrations are so deep, it definitely could shatter many things.
The stadium was the gracious host to myriad sporting events throughout the 1930s. Football, however, was not in the grand scheme. But when a blizzard struck Chicago in 1932, the NFL championship game between the Bears and Portsmouth took refuge in the shelter of the stadium.
And they put dirt on the floor to play. Now, the indoor area wasn't big enough for a 100-yard stadium, so they played with 80 yards, which had to suffice.
The Bears won 9-0 on a touchdown pass from Bronco Nagurski to Red Grange. The task of keeping dates filled brought with it make-or-break challenges.
It's the biggest building in town. You know, if you're coming to town and you want to draw a crowd, where would you go? The Chicago Stadium.
Events ranging from dog shows and horse shows to botanical conventions and cooking schools were booked in an attempt to fill the building's calendar.
It was a tremendous asset to the west side of Chicago and gave it a big boost. So these are great things for the city, for the area, and for the entire country to have such spectacular stadiums available for sports events and entertainment.
Wrestling was a popular ticket as fans witnessed a battle of the sexes and victory for the women's movement in an unusual main event. Other grappling favorites to do battle included Mountain Man Dean and Gorgeous George. But the management team that followed Patty Harmon experienced a short tenure as well, running into eventual financial disaster. Enter Arthur Wirtz and James Norris, who in 1934 bought the stadium and saved it from financial ruin.
Mr. Wirtz was a master showman. He visualized immediately that a star like Sonja Henie coming out of the Olympics could be the focus for a very glamorous skating show.
In 1934, Arthur Wirtz, embarking on one of his most successful ventures,